For years, the story was that Sumit chose Jenny over his family's money. The real story is that his mother tried to choose the money over her own son. We have uncovered a tale of forgery, greed, and a courtroom battle that ends with a Singh family member in handcuffs. For fans of Fiancé, the saga of Sumit and Jenny has always been a masterclass in family conflict. A seemingly endless tug-of-war between a son's love for a woman and his duty to his parents, Sadhna and Anil. The central point of leverage, the weapon wielded with devastating precision by Sadhna, was always the inheritance. It was the ghost at the feast, the unspoken threat in every argument, the financial guillotine hanging over Sumit's head. But what if the guillotine had already fallen years ago in secret? What if the story we were all told was the biggest lie of all? Before we pull back the curtain on this entire conspiracy, a conspiracy that involves forged documents, secret investigators, and a courtroom showdown that will change the Singh family forever. Do us a favor. If you love getting the real story, the details the cameras don't show you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications because you are not going to want to miss a single second of the evidence we're about to lay out. This isn't just a recap, it's an expose. Let's begin with the lie, because every great deception is built on a foundation of seemingly plausible untruths. 4. Over a decade, the narrative presented to Sumit, to Jenny, and to the world was simple and brutal. Sumit's grandfather, a patriarch of the old school, had established a significant family trust. This trust, which we now understand through insider reports to be called the Singh Legacy Trust, was intended to provide a substantial financial cushion for his grandchildren. It was by all accounts a life-changing amount of money. Not just a nest egg, but a fortune that would ensure comfort, security, and opportunity for generations. However, according to Sadhna, there was a rigid, unbreakable condition attached, a morality clause, if you will. The inheritance was contingent on Sumit entering into an arranged marriage, a marriage that would uphold the family's traditions and social standing. By choosing Jenny, an American woman significantly older than him, Sumit had supposedly spat in the face of his grandfather's wishes. He had, in Sodha's own words, voided the contract. This lie became the central pillar of Sadhna's psychological manipulation. It wasn't just a single statement. It was a constant dripping poison administered over years. Imagine the conversations, the tearful phone calls, the tense family gatherings. You gave up a fortune for her. She would say, her voice a mixture of pity and accusation. Do you see what your life could have been? A big house, respect, security. You threw it all away. She painted a picture of a destitute future for Sumit, a life of struggle and regret, all because of the woman he loved. She used this narrative to isolate him, to make him feel as though he was a constant disappointment. A man who had not only failed his parents but had failed his own future. This wasn't just about expressing disapproval of Jenny. It was about creating a prison of guilt for Sumit. Every financial difficulty he and Jenny faced, every small setback, was framed as a direct consequence of his selfish decision. Sadhna would say things like, if only you had the trust fund, you wouldn't have to worry about the rent this month. Or, that car is always breaking down, you could have had any car you wanted. She wasn't just a mother expressing her hurt. She was an architect of misery, ensuring that the ghost of the lost fortune haunted their every waking moment. The lie was effective because it played on Sumit's deepest insecurities, his desire to be a good son, his duty to his family, and his responsibility as a husband to provide for his wife. Sadhna expertly twisted these virtues into weapons against him. She made him believe that his love for Jenny was the direct cause of their financial instability. A subtle but powerful way to sow seeds of resentment in their relationship. An insider close to the family described it as a form of emotional waterboarding, a relentless campaign to break his spirit and ultimately his marriage. The goal, it seems, was not just to make him regret his choice, but to make him reverse it. Sadhna believed that if she could make his life with Jenny difficult enough, if she could constantly remind him of the gilded cage he had abandoned, he would eventually come to his senses and return to the family fold. A prodigal son begging for forgiveness. But here's where the story begins to unravel, where the first loose thread appears in Sadhna's carefully woven tapestry of deceit. And that thread, as it so often is in these stories, was Jenny. Jenny the outsider. The one with nothing to lose and a healthy dose of American skepticism. While Sumit had been conditioned from birth to accept his mother's words, Jenny saw things with a clearer eye. She saw the emotional toll it was taking on her husband. But she also started to see something else, something that didn't add up. The investigation didn't begin with a dramatic confrontation or a sudden revelation. It began with small, nagging inconsistencies. It began with a new car. Soda and Anil, by all public accounts, were living on a modest middle-class income. Anil's salary was respectable but not extravagant. Yet suddenly Sadhna was exhibiting a lifestyle that far outstripped their known financial resources. It started with a brand-new top-of-the-line Honda City sedan, a significant purchase. When questioned, Sadhna brushed it off as the result of careful saving and a special bonus Anil had received. But then there were other things. Expensive silk sars for social events, pieces of gold jewelry from Tanishq that were not just trinkets, but substantial investments. There was a vacation to go staying at a luxury resort. An exclusive source told us that Jenny overheard Sadhna on the phone once bragging to a relative about a handsome dividend from an old family investment that had finally matured. 2. Sumit, who was so accustomed to his mother's financial pronouncements, these might have seemed like isolated instances of good fortune. But to Jenny, it was a pattern. She was living a life of careful budgeting, watching every rupee, constantly aware of the fortune they had supposedly sacrificed. And here was the woman who lamented their poverty, who claimed the family coffers were diminished because of Sumit's marriage, living a life of increasing luxury. The math wasn't matching. The narrative was breaking. Jenny's suspicion born from these observations began to harden into a chilling hypothesis. What if the story about the disinheritance was a lie? And if it was a lie, where was the money really coming from? On a hunch, a powerful, gut-wrenching feeling that she could no longer ignore, Jenny made a decision that would change everything. Using her own savings, money she had carefully guarded for her and Sumit's future, she decided to do something drastic. She hired a private investigator. This was not a decision she took lightly. It was a monumental breach of trust. An admission that she believed her mother-in-law was not just manipulative, but potentially a criminal. She found a discreet firm in Delhi, one known for handling sensitive financial matters for high-net-worth families. She met with a man we'll call Mr. Kararma, a seasoned investigator, a former law enforcement officer with a quiet demeanor and a reputation for being relentless. Jenny laid out the story for him. The supposed disinheritance, the grandfather's trust, Sadhna's constant claims of financial ruin, and the recent inexplicable displays of wealth. She asked him to do one thing. Find the voided trust. Find proof that it ever existed and what happened to it. Mr. Sharma was professional but skeptical. These family disputes were often messy, fueled by emotion rather than fact. But he took the case, promising discretion and a thorough search of all available records. The investigation began quietly. Mr. Kararma's team started by running a full financial background check on Sadhna and Anil. As Jenny suspected, their declared income and assets did not align with their recent spending. There was a significant unaccounted-for stream of revenue entering their accounts, disguised as sporadic investment returns and gifts from relatives. The real challenge was locating the Singh Legacy Trust. Family trusts in India are private legal instruments not easily accessible through public records. It required deep digging, leveraging old contacts in the legal and financial sectors. For weeks, the trail was cold. Mr. Kararma's team hit one bureaucratic wall after another. It was beginning to look like Sadhna's story, however embellished, might be true. Perhaps the trust had been dissolved or its assets transferred long ago. But then they got a break. An insider theory suggests that a disgruntled former clerk at the law firm that had originally drafted the trust for Sumit's grandfather still had access to old file indexes. A small, well-placed fee for information yielded a crucial piece of data: the trust's official registration number and the bank where its assets were held. This was the key. With this information, Mr. Kararma, using legal pretexts, was able to petition the bank for records. And what he found was the bombshell that would blow the Singh family apart. The Singh Legacy Trust was not voided. It was not dissolved. It was very much active. In fact, it was thriving. The portfolio had grown substantially over the years and was now worth, according to our sources, a fortune that could be valued in the crores of rupees, millions of US dollars. The trust had been paying out regular handsome dividends for years. The statements showed these dividends being deposited like clockwork every quarter. But they weren't being deposited into a dormant account. They were being deposited directly into a personal bank account. An account belonging solely to Sadhna Singh. This was the first smoking gun. The lie was exposed. Sumit had not been disinherited. The money was still there. But Sadhna hadn't just lied about it. She had been actively collecting it, living off her son's inheritance while simultaneously shaming him for having lost it. But the discovery raised an even more sinister question. How could a trust presumably with Sumit as the named beneficiary be redirected to his mother? A trust is a legally binding document. You can't just change the beneficiary on a whim. There had to be a legal mechanism, a piece of paper that authorized this transfer. Mr. Kararma dug deeper into the bank's records, requesting the full legal file associated with the trust. And there, buried in a stack of administrative paperwork, he found it. It was a single-page document, a legal relinquishment form. It was dated approximately months after Sumit and Jenny were officially married. The document was a formal declaration seemingly written and signed by Sumit Singh, in which he voluntarily and irrevocably relinquished all his rights, titles, and claims to the Singh Legacy Trust. It named a successor trustee, a person who would assume full control over the trust and its assets. That successor was his mother, Sadhna. On the surface, it looked legitimate. It was typed on official-looking legal paper, contained the appropriate jargon, and was even notarized. And at the bottom, there it was. The signature of Sumit Singh. It was a moment of sickening clarity for the investigation. This was how she did it. She hadn't just told a lie. She had created the legal reality to back it up. She had a document that proved Sumit had willingly given her his entire inheritance. It was the perfect crime. Who would ever question a legal document, a son's apparent final act of deference to his mother? But Mr. Kararma was a professional. He had seen too many perfect documents in his career. He scanned a high-resolution copy of the relinquishment form and sent it along with several known verified samples of Sumit's signature from other documents to a forensic handwriting expert. He didn't tell her the context. Only that he needed an impartial analysis. The expert he chose was a woman named Dr. Anjali Varma, one of the most respected forensic document examiners in the country. Her testimony had sent people to prison. She spent 2 days with the documents using digital microscopes, spectrum analysis to check the ink, and pressure point mapping technology. Her conclusion was delivered in a crisp, unequivocal report. The signature on the relinquishment form was a forgery. Dr. Varma described it in her report as a crude but effective forgery. She explained that the forger had clearly traced or practiced Sumit's signature, capturing the general shape and flow. To an untrained eye, like that of a bank clerk or a notary, it would pass inspection. But under forensic scrutiny, the fraud was obvious. She pointed out several key discrepancies. The pen pressure was unnatural with hesitation marks where the forger had paused to ensure accuracy. The loops in the S of Sumit were slightly more rounded than in his authentic signatures. The cross on the T was placed at a different angle, a subconscious habit that forgers almost never get right. The ink, upon chemical analysis, was slightly different from the ink used in the notary stamp, suggesting they were not applied at the same time. Her final damning sentence read, "There is a % certainty that the signature on the questioned document was not written by the same individual who wrote the known sample signatures of Sumit Singh." This was the second and far more powerful smoking gun. The document was a fake. Sadhna hadn't just lied. She had committed a serious crime. She had forged her own son's signature to steal his inheritance. But the investigation wasn't over. A forgery is one thing, but proving intent, proving that it was Sadhna who orchestrated it, was the next step. Mr. Kararma knew that a simple denial from Sadhna, a claim that she too was a victim of some unknown fraudster, could muddy the waters in a courtroom. He needed something more. He needed to get inside her head. He needed a confession. And in the digital age, confessions are often found in forgotten corners of cyberspace. The investigators' team launched what is known as a digital deep dive. They focused on Sadhna's brother, a man named Rajesh. The brother who, according to bank records, had received several large gifts from Sadhna over the years, funds that clearly originated from the trust dividends. It was our exclusive insider who suggested that Rajesh and Sadhna had a recent falling out over money. Rajesh felt his share was too small for the risk he was taking by staying silent. This falling out made him a weak link. We cannot confirm the exact methods used by the investigator, but sources familiar with these types of high-stakes cases suggest that it often involves social engineering or leveraging a source close to the target. What we do know is that the investigator managed to retrieve a key piece of communication. It wasn't a text message or a WhatsApp chat. It was an email. An email sent from Sadhna's account to her brother Rish, dated just a few days after the forged document was successfully filed with the bank. The email was the final devastating piece of the puzzle. It was the smoking gun, the confession, and the motive, all wrapped up in a few terrifying sentences. It read in part, "Rajesh, it is done. The papers are filed. The bank has confirmed the transfer of control. Now that I control the funds, Sumit will have to listen to me. He will see the mistake he has made. When he is struggling, when he has nothing, he will come back to us and he will finally leave that woman. This is not for me. It is for his own good. I am saving my son." The courtroom fell into a stunned silence when this email was eventually read aloud. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. For now, just imagine Mr. Kararma sitting in his office with 3 pieces of evidence in front of him. The bank statements proving the theft, the forensic report proving the forgery, and the email proving the motive. It was a perfect airtight case. The web of lies Sadhna had spun for over a decade was about to be torn apart, and she had no idea the storm was coming. The investigator compiled his findings into a thick, detailed dossier and called Jenny for a final meeting. The time for investigation was over. The time for confrontation was about to begin. The meeting between Jenny, Sumit, and their lawyer was one of the most difficult moments of their lives. Jenny had to present this evidence to her husband. Evidence that his own mother had not just disapproved of him, but had actively and criminally betrayed him in the most profound way imaginable. Imagine Sumit's reaction. The man who had spent years feeling guilty, feeling like a failure, a disappointment who had cost his family a fortune. He now had to process the reality that he was not a disappointment, but a victim. The fortune was never lost. It was stolen. And the thief was his own mother. Our sources described Sumit as being completely shattered. The anger was there, of course, but the overwhelming emotion was a deep, soul-crushing heartbreak. The woman who had given him life had, in a very real sense, tried to steal his future. The conversation with the lawyer was stark and clinical. They went over the evidence piece by piece. The act of trust, the forged signature, the incriminating email. The lawyer was blunt. This was not just a family dispute. It was a clear, uncut case of felony fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. He laid out their options. They could confront Sadhna privately and demand the money back, but that would leave her in control and likely lead to more manipulation. Or they could take the fight to the one place where the truth could not be hidden, a court of law. They could file a lawsuit to invalidate the forgery, restore Sumit's rights as the rightful beneficiary of the trust, and reclaim every rupee that had been stolen from him. It was a monumental decision for Sumit. Suing your own mother is an unthinkable act in any culture, but especially in India, where familial piety is so deeply ingrained. It meant declaring war on his own family, turning a private pain into a public spectacle. He looked at Jenny, the woman he had been told he had given up everything for. And in that moment, he realized that fighting for this inheritance was no longer about the money. It was about the truth. It was about reclaiming his own story, a story that his mother had twisted into a weapon against him. It was about validating his love for Jenny, proving that their marriage was not a mistake to be punished, but a life to be built. With a heavy heart, but a firm resolve, Sumit made his decision. He agreed to sue his own mother. The lawsuit was filed and the legal gears began to turn. Summons were issued. Sadhna and Anil were officially served with the legal complaint. The shock and outrage from the Singh family were predictable. They closed ranks portraying Sadhna as the victim, a loving mother being attacked by her greedy, ungrateful son and his manipulative foreign wife. They tried to frame the lawsuit as Jenny's idea, a Western-style money grab that was tearing their traditional family apart. Sadhna, for her part, went into full denial mode. She claimed the document was genuine, that Sumit had signed it years ago in a moment of clarity, begging her to take control of the funds so he wouldn't squander them. She painted Sumit as mentally unstable, easily influenced, and a liar. But her story had holes. If Sumit had willingly signed it, why did she spend a decade telling everyone he was disinherited? Why not just say, Sumit asked me to manage his money for him? The two narratives were completely contradictory, and this would become a major problem for her defense. The case moved toward a courtroom showdown. Depositions were taken. Evidence was submitted. Sadhna's legal team, likely funded by the very trust money they were defending, tried every tactic to delay and dismiss the case. They filed motions to question the investigators' methods, to discredit the handwriting expert, to have the email thrown out as inadmissible, but the evidence was too strong. The judge reviewed the preliminary findings and fast-tracked the case for a civil trial. The day of the trial arrived. The courtroom was a tense, quiet theater of family drama. On one side, Sumit and Jenny looking nervous but determined. On the other, Sadhna Anil and her brother Rajesh, presenting a united front of indignant denial. The air was thick with unspoken history, a decade of resentment and betrayal culminating in this sterile formal setting. The trial began with Jenny and Sumit's lawyer laying out the case in a clear chronological narrative. He presented the existence of the Singh Legacy Trust. He presented the bank statements showing the uninterrupted flow of money into Sadhna's account. And then he called his first key witness to the stand, Dr. Anjali Varma, the forensic handwriting expert. Dr. Varma was the embodiment of professional credibility. She walked the court through her methodology with scientific precision, displaying enlarged images of the real and forged signatures on a large screen for the judge to see. She pointed out the subtle hesitation marks, the differences in pen lift and pressure, the telltale signs of a traced forgery. It is the small mistakes that always reveal the truth, she explained calmly. A person's signature is a product of muscle memory, an unconscious act, a forgery that is a conscious drawing, an attempt to imitate. The body does not lie. When Sadhna's lawyer cross-examined her, attempting to poke holes in her expertise, she was unshakable. Can you tell this court with absolute certainty that my client's son did not sign this document? The lawyer challenged. Dr. Varma looked directly at the judge. I can say with scientific certainty that the signature on that relinquishment form is a forgery. Sumit Singh did not sign it. A murmur went through the courtroom. The first pillar of Sadhna's defense had crumbled. The next witness was Sumit. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. A son testifying against his mother. His lawyer led him through the story of the disinheritance, the years of manipulation, the constant guilt. Sumit spoke in a low, pained voice, but he never wavered. He recounted the specific phrases his mother used, the way she made him feel, the emotional prison she had built around him. The most dramatic moment came during the cross-examination. Sadhna's lawyer, attempting to paint Sumit as confused and ungrateful, took a softer, more patronizing tone. Sumit, he said, this is a very serious accusation you are making against your mother, the woman who raised you. Why? Why would she do this? Why would your own mother forge your name and lie to you for all these years? It was the question the entire case hung on, the question of motive. Sumit didn't answer right away. He paused, turned in the witness box, and looked directly at Sadhna, who was sitting at the defendant's table. Their eyes met across the courtroom. It was a look of profound sadness, a final heartbreaking acknowledgement of a bond that was now irrevocably broken. When Sumit finally spoke, his voice was clear and steady, filled with the weight of a lifetime of pain. He looked back at the lawyer, but his words were for his mother, because he said, she has always valued control more than she has valued me. The words hung in the air, a devastatingly simple and powerful indictment. It wasn't about greed, not entirely. It was about power. The power to control her son's life, his choices, his happiness. The inheritance was never just money. It was leverage. It was the tool she used to enforce her will. By stealing it, she believed she could break him and force him to conform. At that moment, everyone in the courtroom understood the true nature of the family's dysfunction. This was not a dispute over money. It was a battle for a man's soul. But the final undeniable blow was yet to come. Jenny and Sumit's lawyer stood up for his redirect. Your Honor, he said. The defense asks why Sadhna Singh would do this. I believe. She answered that question herself. He then produced a certified copy of the Email, the digital dagger that Sadhna had sent to her brother. He projected it onto the large screen for the entire court to see. He asked for it to be read into the official record. A clerk read the words aloud, her voice flat and emotionless, which only amplified the horror of the content. Now that I control the funds, Sumit will have to listen to me. He will finally leave that woman. It is for his own good. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. There it was, in her own words. The motive, the plan, the cold, calculating cruelty of it all. It was an admission of not just the crime, but the malicious intent behind it. Sadhna's face went pale. Anil stared at the floor, his face a mask of shame. Her brother Rajesh, implicated as a co-conspirator, looked as if he was about to be sick. Her lawyer slumped in his chair, knowing the case was lost. There was no defense against this. There was no spinning it. It was a confession in black and white. The judge, a stern, experienced woman who had seen countless family disputes, looked down from her bench with an expression of cold fury. She had seen the evidence. She had heard the testimony. And she had read the email. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. She declared the relinquishment document an obvious and criminal forgery. She ruled it null and void, effective immediately. She ordered that Sumit Singh be immediately restored as the sole and rightful beneficiary of the Singh Legacy Trust. She didn't stop there. She ordered a full accounting of the trust's assets and instructed that all funds plus interest that had been misappropriated by Sadhna over the last decade be returned to Sumit. In a single pronouncement, Sumit was awarded his full inheritance. The fortune was his. But the judge's work was not done. She looked directly at Sadhna, her voice laced with ice. This court, she announced, does not take acts of fraud and forgery lightly. This was not a simple family misunderstanding. This was a calculated criminal act of theft perpetrated by a mother against her own son for the purpose of emotional and financial blackmail. She then delivered the final shocking blow. Due to the blatant and criminal nature of this act, I am referring this entire case file, including the evidence of forgery and the conspiracy to defraud, to the criminal prosecutor's office for immediate investigation. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. This court is now adjourned. Chaos erupted, but over the noise, the image that no one will ever forget was what happened next. As Sadhna sat there, stunned and defeated, two court bailiffs approached her table. They spoke to her in low tones. She was not being arrested, not yet. But she was being escorted from the courtroom for immediate questioning by investigators. From the prosecutor's office, a criminal case was being opened against her. As they led her away, a woman who had built her life on control had finally lost it all. Her face was a mixture of shock, humiliation, and sheer disbelief. Her life of manipulation was over. Sumit and Jenny held each other, not in triumph, but in a state of exhausted relief. The truth was finally out. They were free. But the family they had once known was destroyed forever. The battle was won, but the cost was immeasurable. As Sadhna was led down the hallway on a path that could very well end in a jail cell, one question remained. Did Sadhna's greed finally destroy her? Or was she a victim of her own obsession? Drop your verdict in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories the cameras never tell. Now, as the courtroom doors closed behind a disgraced Sadhna Singh, the immediate aftermath was a strange cocktail of victory and sorrow. For Sumit and Jenny, the legal win was absolute. The judge's ruling was ironclad, and the process of transferring the trust's assets and control back to Sumit began almost immediately. Financial advisors and lawyers were brought in. For the first time in their life together, they were not just financially stable. They were wealthy. The phantom of the lost inheritance that had haunted them for so long was finally gone, replaced by the tangible reality of a secure future. They could buy a house, travel, live, without the constant grinding anxiety of making ends meet. On paper, it was a fairy tale ending. But the emotional reality was far more complex. The victory felt hollow. How do you celebrate a win that comes at the cost of your own family? Sumit, we're told by sources close to the couple, fell into a deep contemplative sadness. He had won the war, but the battlefield was his own childhood, his own memories, his own mother. He had to reconcile the image of the mother he loved, the woman who had raised him, with the image of the criminal mastermind who had so coldly and deliberately betrayed him. There was no joy in seeing her publicly humiliated. No satisfaction in knowing she faced potential prison time. There was only a profound sense of loss, a loss of innocence, a loss of family, a loss of the very foundation upon which he had built his life. Jenny in this period became his rock. Having been the catalyst for the investigation, she felt a strange mixture of vindication and guilt. She had been right all along. Her instincts had saved them from a lifetime of manipulation and financial hardship. But she also knew that her actions had detonated a bomb in the heart of Sumit's family, and the fallout was devastating. She supported Sumit, giving him the space to grieve, reassuring him that his feelings were valid and reminding him that they had sought the truth, not revenge. Their focus, she insisted, had to be on building their new life together, a life free from the shadows of the past. Meanwhile, the Singh family was imploding. The judge's verdict and the referral to the criminal prosecutor's office sent shockwaves through their community. The story was no longer a private family matter. It was a public scandal. Anil, who had stood by Sadhna throughout the trial, was now a pariah. Our insiders paint a picture of a man in complete crisis. Was he a knowing accomplice in his wife's scheme, or was he a fool who was willfully blind to her actions? The evidence suggests he likely knew where the money was coming from, but chose not to ask the difficult questions, enjoying the comfortable lifestyle it provided. Now he was facing the consequences. His reputation was in tatters, and he was staring at the possibility of his wife going to prison and his family's name being dragged through the mud for years to come. And what about Rajesh, Sadhna's brother and co-conspirator? The incriminating email had exposed his complicity. He was now a person of interest in the criminal investigation. Fearing for his own legal safety, he immediately tried to distance himself from his sister. Sources tell us he began cooperating with the authorities, attempting to paint himself as a reluctant participant who was manipulated by his powerful and persuasive sister. He was trying to save himself, even if it meant burying Sadhna completely. The family alliance, once a united front against Sumit and Jenny, had shattered into a million pieces of self-interest and betrayal. It was a textbook example of how conspiracies built on greed and lies eventually consumed themselves from within. The criminal investigation into Sadhna Singh moved with surprising speed. The evidence compiled for the civil trial was so overwhelming that the prosecutor's office had a ready-made case. They had the forged document, the expert testimony, the bank record showing a clear pattern of embezzlement, and the email Sadhna's own confession of intent. The investigators brought Sadhna in for multiple rounds of questioning. Her initial strategy of denial and feigned ignorance quickly fell apart under the weight of the evidence. She tried to blame her brother. She tried to claim the email was taken out of context. She even attempted to argue that she was only protecting the money for Sumit. A claim that was laughable, given her years of telling him it was gone forever. The prosecutors were not buying it. They saw the case for what it was, a long-term premeditated scheme to defraud her son. They began preparing a formal indictment with charges that could include felony forgery, grand larceny, and wire fraud in connection with the email. The legal experts we consulted believe that given the amount of money involved in the duration of the crime, Sadhna was facing a very real possibility of a significant prison sentence. The idea of Sadhna Singh, the proud matriarch, the arbiter of family tradition, trading her silk sars for a prison uniform was no longer a distant possibility. It was becoming an imminent threat. It was at this point, with the walls closing in, that a new desperate strategy emerged from the Singh family. A campaign of emotional blackmail began, one aimed not at a judge or a jury, but at Sumit himself. The family started reaching out to him, not with apologies, but with pleas for mercy. Relatives who had once shunned him were now calling him, crying, begging him to intervene. The narrative they pushed was one of compassion. She is still your mother. They would say, can you live with yourself if you send your own mother to prison? Think of the family's honor. Think of your father's health. This has gone too far. You have the money now. Isn't that enough? You have to tell the prosecutor to drop the charges. This puts Sumit in an impossible position. The criminal case was now out of his hands. It was the state versus Sadhna Singh. He couldn't simply drop the charges. But his family didn't see it that way. In their eyes, he was the only one who could stop this. They were asking him to stand up and protect the woman who had so ruthlessly betrayed him. It was a twisted final act of manipulation, using the very bonds of family she had desecrated to try and save herself from the consequences of her actions. For Sumit, this was perhaps the most painful part of the entire ordeal. It forced him to confront the deep-seated cultural expectation of filial duty. Could he and should he show mercy to someone who had shown him none? This internal conflict raged within Sumit. Jenny, ever the pragmatist, urged him to see the situation clearly. This was not about revenge. It was about justice and accountability. If Sadhna faced no real consequences for her crimes, what was to stop her from trying to interfere in their lives again in the future? Allowing the legal process to run its course was not an act of cruelty. It was an act of self-preservation. It was the only way to ensure their future peace and to send a clear message that her reign of control was truly over. Sumit knew she was right, but the emotional pull of his family's pleas was immense. The climax of this emotional drama came in a single unannounced visit. Anil, Sumit's father, showed up at their apartment alone. He looked like a broken man. He didn't yell or make accusations. He simply begged. He begged his son to forgive his mother. He spoke of her failing health, her mental anguish, the shame that was destroying them. He appealed to Sumit not as a victim but as a son. She made a terrible mistake. Anil pleaded, tears in his eyes. A mistake born of a mother's misguided love. But prison, Sumit, it will kill her and it will kill me. Please, son, don't let this be the end of our family. This was the ultimate test for Sumit, faced with his father's raw desperation. He had to make a final choice. He had to choose between the justice he was owed and the mercy his family was begging for. What he did next surprised everyone. He didn't agree to intervene, but he didn't turn his father away either. He offered a conditional peace. He told his father that he would not actively campaign for his mother's imprisonment. He would not give vindictive interviews or push the prosecutor for a harsher sentence. He would let the justice system do its job, whatever the outcome might be. But he had one condition for this passive stance. Sadhna had to confess not to the police but to him. She had to sit in a room with him and Jenny with no lawyers and no other family members and tell him the truth. She had to admit what she did and more importantly why she did it. He needed to hear it from her lips. It was not a legal demand but a deeply personal one. He needed one moment of genuine unadulterated truth from his mother. Before he could even begin to consider the concept of forgiveness. The message was relayed to Sadhna through her husband. At first, her pride rebelled. The idea of confessing her sins to her son and his wife was a humiliation she couldn't bear. But her legal situation was dire. Her lawyer advised her that a display of remorse, even if it came late, could potentially influence a judge at sentencing. A private apology to her son might be spun as the first step toward rehabilitation. Cornered and with no other options, Sadhna agreed. The meeting was arranged on neutral ground in a private room at a quiet hotel. The atmosphere was thick, with a decade of unspoken anger and pain. Sadhna arrived with Anil, but as per Sumit's condition, Anil waited outside. It was just the three of them, Sumit, Jenny, and Sadhna. For a long time, there was silence. Sadhna refused to make eye contact, staring at her hands in her lap. It was Sumit who finally broke the silence. His voice was quiet, devoid of anger, filled only with a profound weariness. Why? He asked. Just tell me why. What followed was not the dramatic, tearful confession of a remorseful mother. It was something far more chilling. Sadhna in a low halting voice began to explain her reasoning. And as she spoke, it became clear that she still on some level did not believe she had done anything wrong. She spoke of tradition, of duty, of the shame Sumit's marriage had brought upon the family. She described the inheritance not as his, but as a family asset that she, as the matriarch, had a right to control. I did it to protect you, she claimed, her voice gaining a hint of its old self-righteousness. I knew that woman would be your ruin. I thought if you had no money, you would see her for what she is and come back to us. It was all for you. A mother's love is a fierce thing. You cannot understand it. There was no apology in her words, no remorse, only justification. She was not a thief. She was a savior. She was not a forger. She was a protector of family honor. In her twisted worldview, her crimes were acts of love. It was a stunning, terrifying glimpse into the mind of a true narcissist. She was incapable of seeing the pain she had caused, capable only of seeing her own intentions as pure. Jenny sat in stunned silence, realizing that the woman in front of her was not just manipulative, but deeply delusional. For Sumit, this was the final, heartbreaking closure he needed. He had hoped for an apology, a moment of connection, a glimmer of the mother he remembered from his childhood. Instead, he got confirmation of the monster she had become. The love she spoke of was not love at all. It was a possessive, suffocating obsession. He realized in that moment that forgiveness was impossible because the person he needed to forgive did not even believe she had committed a sin. He stood up, his face a mask of calm resignation. Thank you for your honesty, mother, he said. The word mother now sounding alien and forced. You have told me everything I need to know. He and Jenny walked out of the room, leaving Sadhna alone with her justifications. They walked past Anil in the hallway without a word. They got in their car and drove away, and in the rearview mirror, Sumit saw the hotel disappear. And with it, the last vestiges of the family he once knew. He had his answer. He had his truth. And he was finally completely free. The epilogue to the story wrote itself in the months that followed. With no show of remorse, the prosecutor's office pursued the case against Sadhna aggressively. Faced with an ironclad case and her son's refusal to plead for leniency, Sadhna's lawyer advised her to take a plea bargain. She pleaded guilty to lesser charges of fraud and forgery, avoiding a lengthy public trial. The judge, taking into account her age and lack of a prior criminal record, sentenced her not to a long prison term, but to 2 years of house arrest and a significant fine. She was confined to her home, her passport revoked, her assets frozen. It was a gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. The woman who had craved control above all else was now under the control of the state. Her power was broken. Sumit and Jenny used their newfound wealth not for extravagance, but for peace. They bought a beautiful new home in a quiet neighborhood far from the turmoil of his family. They traveled, seeing the world together on their own terms. But most importantly, they built a life. A life based on trust, honesty, and mutual respect. All the things that had been absent in Sumit's relationship with his parents. The money didn't solve all their problems. The emotional scars ran deep, but it gave them the freedom to heal. Sumit started therapy to process the years of psychological abuse. Jenny found a new sense of security. No longer feeling like an outsider, constantly under attack. The story of the Singh family became a cautionary tale whispered in their community. A tale of how a mother's obsession with control and tradition fueled by greed led to the complete destruction of her own family. Sadhna's name became synonymous with scandal and betrayal. Anil lived out his days as a diminished man caring for a wife who was a prisoner in her own home, forever estranged from his only son. The Singh legacy trust, once a symbol of patriarchal tradition, was now in the hands of the very son who had defied that tradition. And in a final act of poetic justice, Sumit and Jenny used a portion of the funds to set up a small charitable foundation to help couples in cross-cultural relationships who face the family opposition. They had taken the instrument of their oppression and turned it into a source of hope for others. For years, the story was that Sumit chose Jenny over money. The real story, the one that finally came to light, was that he chose love over control. And in the end, he got both. Now, for those of you who have stayed with us, who have hit that like button and subscribed, you believe you know how the story ends. A judge's gavel, a mother's downfall, a son's inheritance restored. It's a clean, satisfying conclusion. But we are here to tell you that the verdict in that courtroom was not the end of the story. It was merely the end of the first act. The real truth, the darker, more complex conspiracy that has been hidden from the public is far more shocking than a simple case of forgery. What we have uncovered through exclusive insider reports and newly emerged theories is a story that doesn't just implicate Sadhna, but suggests she may have been just one player, perhaps even a pawn in a much larger, more sinister family plot. So, get comfortable because we are about to pull back the curtain on the conspiracy behind the conspiracy. Let's start with the man who sat silently in the courtroom. The man who played the role of the broken, supportive husband, Anil Singh. The narrative presented him as a passive figure, a man caught between his domineering wife and his defiant son. He was the picture of the traditional Indian husband, deferring to his wife in domestic matters, a quiet rock of support. But what if that persona was a carefully constructed mask? An exclusive theory now emerging from sources who have known the family for decades suggests that Anil was not the follower, but the architect, not the henpecked husband, but the cold, calculating mastermind behind the entire scheme. Consider this. Sadhna is a creature of emotion. She is loud, reactive, and transparent in her manipulations. Her actions, while cruel, are driven by a fiery possessive passion, forgery, long-term financial planning, the careful cultivation of a decade-long lie. These require a different kind of mind. They require patience, meticulous planning, and a cold, detached cruelty. These are not Sadhna's hallmarks. They are, however, the traits of a quiet observer who plays the long game. Our sources suggest that it was Anil who first understood the power the Singh legacy trust would give them over their son. He saw Sumit's independent streak and his burgeoning relationship with Jenny not just as a cultural embarrassment, but as a threat to his control over the family's future and, more importantly, its finances. A forensic psychologist we consulted who analyzed the family's on-screen dynamics offered a chilling assessment. In many dysfunctional family systems, Dr. Alakri told us, you will find a distractor and a controller. Sadhna is the classic distractor. Her loud emotional outbursts draw all the attention. She becomes the lightning rod for conflict, absorbing all the anger and blame. This allows the true controller to operate in the shadows. Their influence unseen and unquestioned. Anil fits the profile of the quiet controller perfectly. While everyone was focused on Sadhna's latest tirade, he was the one making the strategic moves. Think back to the courtroom. While Soda was crumbling, Anil's face was a mask of shame. But was it shame for his wife's actions or shame for being caught? The incriminating email was sent from Sadhna's account. But who helped her draft it with such clear strategic language? Who navigated the complexities of the banking system to facilitate the transfer? The official story pins it all on Sadhna and her brother, but financial crimes of this nature often require a level of sophistication that Sadhna, by all accounts, does not possess. It was Anil, our sources insist, who handled the family's finances. It was Anil who had the relationships at the bank. It was Anil who understood the legal loopholes. Sadhna was the weapon, but Anil was the hand that aimed it. His silence in public was not a sign of weakness. It was a strategy of plausible deniability. He let his wife be the crazy one, Zanin, the emotional villain, knowing that if the scheme ever imploded, she would take the full force of the fall while he could play the part of the grieving, disappointed husband. His visit to Sumit, begging for mercy, can be seen in a new light, not as the act of a loving father, but as the final desperate move of a chess master trying to save his queen to avoid his own checkmate. But if Anil was the architect, then Sadhna's brother Rajesh was the eager contractor who did the dirty work. The initial story painted Rajesh as a simple accomplice, a recipient of his sister's stolen generosity. The truth we've uncovered is far more damning. Rajesh was not a passive beneficiary. He was an active and crucial co-conspirator motivated by his own desperate financial situation. An insider report from a source close to Ray's own family reveals that at the time the forgery was conceived, Rajesh was on the brink of bankruptcy. His textile business was failing and he was deep in debt to loan sharks. He was desperate and he saw his nephew's inheritance as his own personal lifeline. It was Rish, this new information suggests, who first proposed the idea of the forgery. He had a contact, a shady legal consultant known for creating convincing counterfeit documents. He knew Sadhna was emotionally distraught over Sumit's marriage, and he saw an opportunity to weaponize her pain for his own financial gain. He presented the plan to her, not as a crime, but as a solution, a way for her to protect Sumit's money from Jenny, and in the process, secure the family's honor. He fanned the flames of her paranoia and anger, convincing her that this extreme measure was an act of maternal love. He played on her ego, telling her she was the only one smart enough and strong enough to save her son from himself. We have obtained exclusive details about a series of now deleted communications between Sadhna and Rajesh from a recovered hard drive. Details that were not presented in the civil trial, but are now central to the criminal investigation. These communications paint a chilling picture of their partnership. In one early message, Rajesh writes, "Sister, don't think of it as taking his money. Think of it as holding it for him. When he leaves her and comes back to his senses, you can give it back. It is for the good of the family." He was providing her with the moral justification she needed, absolving her of guilt before the crime was even committed. Another message reveals his role in the logistics. The man I know is an artist. The signature will be perfect. The notary is taken care of. You just need to be strong and sign where I show you. Anil must not know the details. It will worry him. This last line is crucial. It supports the theory that while Anil may have approved of the overall strategy, Rajesh and Sadhna handled the criminal mechanics, creating a firewall to protect the family patriarch. After the forgery was successful, the tone of their communications shifted. They celebrated their victory with Sadhna writing, "We did it, brother. We saved him." But soon the messages turned to arguments over money. Rajesh's demands grew more frequent and more aggressive. "I took the biggest risk, sister. I deserve a larger share. My problems are not small." Sadhna in turn grew resentful of his greed. Writing back, "This was about saving my son, not funding your business. You are forgetting your place." The conspiracy born of a toxic mix of greed and control was already beginning to poison the conspirators themselves. Rajesh was not a loyal brother helping his sister. He was a financial parasite who latched onto her emotional crisis and bled her for every rupee he could get. His cooperation with the police was not an act of conscience. It was the final betrayal of a man who has only ever looked out for himself. Perhaps the most shocking revelation we have uncovered, however, goes back much further than the forgery, further even than Sumit and Jenny's relationship. It strikes at the very foundation of the lie Sadhna told for over a decade. The central premise of her manipulation was that Sumit's grandfather had included a strict arranged marriage clause in the trust. She claimed that by marrying Jenny, Sumit had violated his grandfather's sacred wishes and voided his inheritance. But what if that clause never existed? The private investigator Jenny hired, Mr. Kararma, was not satisfied with just finding the forged relinquishment form. A source from within his firm tells us that his professional curiosity was piqued. He decided to dig deeper to find the original trust document as it was drafted and signed by Sumit's grandfather decades ago. After weeks of painstaking work, leveraging legal contacts, and searching dusty archives, he found it. And what it contained was the original sin. The lie upon which all other lies were built. The Singh legacy. Trust in its original and legally binding form contained no morality clause whatsoever. There was no mention of an arranged marriage. There were no conditions placed on a grandchild's choice of spouse. Sumit's grandfather, it turned out, had left his fortune to his grandchildren free and clear to be used to build their own lives as they saw fit. This is a bombshell of staggering proportions. It means that Sadhna's entire narrative of disinheritance was a lie from the very beginning. The manipulation didn't start when Sumit married Jenny. It started the day the trust was created. She had been holding a non-existent threat over his head for his entire adult life. The marriage to Jenny simply provided her with the perfect excuse to enact the final phase of a plan that had been percolating in her mind for years. A plan to seize control of her son's financial destiny. This revelation reframes her entire character. She is not a mother who was pushed to extremes by a difficult situation. She is a master manipulator who viewed her son's inheritance as her own from day one and who was simply waiting for the right moment to claim it. This early, deep-seated deception also explains her violent, almost pathological reaction to Jenny. It wasn't just about cultural differences or age gaps. Jenny was a threat, not because she was the wrong wife, but because she was a witness Sadhna couldn't control. Sumit had always been susceptible to his mother's emotional blackmail. But Jenny, as an outsider, could see the manipulation for what it was. Sadhna's hatred for Jenny was fueled by the fear that Jenny would be the one to expose her original lie. The forgery wasn't a reaction to the marriage. The marriage was the catalyst that forced Sadhna to accelerate her pre-existing criminal plan. She had to secure the money legally through forgery. Before Sumit and his savvy American wife started asking the right questions and discovered that the entire premise of their financial struggle was a fabrication. To cement her control and preempt any such questions, Sadhna launched her own covert war against Jenny, a secret battle that ran parallel to the financial deception. Our investigation has uncovered evidence that Sadhna, using the stolen trust fund money, hired her own private investigator to dig up dirt on Jenny in the United States. She was convinced that Jenny had a sordid past, a secret history that if exposed would be enough to turn Sumit against her. She was looking for anything. A criminal record, secret debts, a hidden ex-husband. She paid a shady American firm thousands of dollars to conduct a deep-dive background check, to interview old acquaintances, to troll through public records. This secret investigation reveals the depths of Sadhna's paranoia and malice. She wasn't just trying to control her son. She was actively trying to destroy his wife. The investigator's report, which we have obtained a summary of, must have been a deep disappointment to Sadhna. It found nothing. Jenny's life was exactly what she said it was. She was a normal, hardworking American woman with no skeletons in her closet. She had worked her whole life, paid her taxes, and had no criminal history. The report concluded that Jenny was, for all intents and purposes, clean. This lack of ammunition, sources say, only enraged Sadhna further. If she couldn't discredit Jenny with the truth, she would have to rely on her carefully constructed lies. It also explains the increasing intensity of her emotional attacks. Frustrated in her attempt to find a real weapon against Jenny, she was forced to double down on the one she had invented, the lie of disinheritance. The ripple effect of the courtroom verdict spread far beyond the immediate family, crashing through the Singh's carefully curated social world. In their community, appearances are everything. The reveal of Sadhna's crimes was not just a legal matter. It was a source of profound social shame. We spoke to an anonymous source, a woman who has been part of the same social circle as the Singhs for over years. Everyone is shocked but not surprised, she told us. Sadhna always had a reputation for being controlling. She would boast about how Sumit would do anything she said, but nobody thought she would go this far. Anil is the one people feel sorry for, but they also wonder how he could not have known. They are paras now. Nobody invites them to weddings or Diwali parties anymore. The shame is too great. Life for Sadhna under house arrest became a prison of her own making, both literally and socially. Confined to her home, her only connection to the outside world was through the very people she could no longer trust. Neighbors reported that the once lively home fell silent. The constant stream of visitors and relatives ceased. The only people who came and went were lawyers and delivery drivers. Sadhna, a woman who thrived on being the center of social attention, was now utterly isolated. Reports from a disgruntled former domestic helper paint a picture of a woman descending into paranoia. She would spend her days watching the news, convinced that every story was a veiled reference to her case. She trusted no one, not even Anil, accusing him of not fighting hard enough for her, of being weak, of letting her son and his wife destroy them. The home that was once her kingdom had become her tomb, a place where she was haunted by the ghosts of her own greed and deceit. In stark contrast, Sumit and Jenny began the slow, arduous process of building a new legacy. The money, which had been the source of so much pain, now became a tool for their healing and their future. They made a conscious decision not to live an extravagant life. Instead, they invested in their peace of mind. Their first major purchase was a home. A place. That was theirs and theirs alone, with no history and no ghosts. A place where they could finally feel safe. But their most significant act was the creation of the Bridge of Hearts Foundation. It was Jenny's idea, born from their own painful experience. The foundation provides small grants and legal support to cross-cultural couples in India who are facing severe family opposition. It's a quiet, targeted form of philanthropy, helping people navigate the very same challenges they endured. In a press release announcing the foundation's launch, Sumit wrote a statement that served as the final word on his family's saga. For many years, I was told that family wealth was meant to enforce tradition and control. We believe its true purpose is to build bridges, not walls. Love should not be a choice between your partner and your future. We want to help ensure that for other couples, it never has to be. It was the ultimate repudiation of everything Sadhna stood for. He had taken the money she stole to control him and used it to foster the very thing she tried to destroy. Love that transcends boundaries. The healing process is ongoing. Sumit still carries the scars of his mother's betrayal. Jenny still contends with the years of being treated as an unwelcome intruder. But they have each other and they have the truth. They survived a conspiracy designed to tear them apart. And in doing so forged a bond that is stronger than any lie. So as we look back on this entire sordid affair, the picture becomes so much clearer and so much darker. This was not a simple case of a mother lashing out. It was a multi-layered conspiracy, possibly orchestrated by a quiet, calculating father, executed by a greedy, desperate brother, and fronted by an emotionally volatile matriarch. It was a plan rooted in a lie that was created decades ago, long before Jenny ever entered the picture. It was a campaign of criminal fraud, secret surveillance, and relentless psychological warfare. The courtroom victory was just the moment the tip of the iceberg became visible. The true monster was the vast dark mass of deceit lurking beneath the surface. The question is no longer simply whether Sadhna's greed destroyed her. The question now is who was the true villain in this saga. Was it Sadhna, the emotional face of the crime? Was it Anil, the silent puppet master? Or was it Rish, the catalyst who lit the match for his own financial gain? This family's legacy is now forever etched. Not in the trust fund they fought over, but in the ruins of their own making. It stands as a chilling testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest dangers don't come from strangers, but from the very people who are supposed to love you the most. The final verdict on who bears the ultimate blame, we leave to you. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.